Well, welcome back to the story of the Belgica. We left off the last day around page 235, and I'm going to skip a little bit further through the story to page 287. This is when they enter the full winter. I think I'll just start a few pages before that, and then as people join in, we can get connected with each other. So welcome to the live, everyone, and I hope you can still hear me. The volume is going to be a little bit low, so you're going to have to turn up your volume, and that should give you the sound. Now, I've no volume, have I? I've no volume at all. That's interesting. No audio. Oh, you do hear me. Oh, okay. I don't hear me. Whatever's going on. But you can hear me. Evening, everyone. Hi, Mick and Kaz. Okay, so everybody can hear me, and I can't hear me. This is just tiddly-boo. But anyway, loud and clear, that's all we need. Thank you very much, Styx, for your help this evening. Okay, so last part of this story was they were getting locked into the ice, and now I want to skip a bit further into the story because it's this part that's interesting. And it's just the last days of the last time the sun is visible before the 70 days of winter. Okay, we've got everybody. Okay, audio is fine. Perfect. Oh, hello, everybody. Okay, I'm going to kick into it. The gloom of night, which was so rapidly followed its lengthening shadow, has suddenly impressed upon us, our passive minds, the awful individual loneliness and unfathomable solitude of this impenetrable Antarctic wilderness. Henceforth, for a period which is a blank in human history, the fair-haired goddess of light will repose beneath the polar star over the more hopeful Arctic lands. Her pathway is no longer over the familiar hummocks and icebergs and the even spreads of this icy desert under the Southern Cross. Her silvery tresses have swept for the last time the sea of frozen wave. Her departing breath has stilled, as by the hand of death, the bosom of this great body of water upon which we have cast our fortunes. May 17th. At 10 o'clock this morning, the purple twilight curve settled over the southwest edge with an indescribable blending of orange and red and gold, and at 11 o'clock this curve was met by a zone of rose which gradually ascended over the northeast above the sun. The ice, which had been grey, was lighted up by a lively flash of pink, which was relieved by long river-like leads of open water having a glowing surface of dark violet. These, however, were the surface colours towards the sun. In the opposite direction there was an entirely different effect. The snow had spread evenly over it, a delicate shade of green, while the waters were a very dark purple blue. A few minutes before 12, a great distorted, ill-defined, semi-globular mass of fire rose above the north edge, edged along the line of sharp hummocks, and then sank beneath the ice. It was an image of the sun, lifted over its actual position by the refractive character of the air, through which its light passed to our eyes. It was in reality an optical illusion, based upon the principle that if a beam of light is compelled to pass through a medium of various densities, as the air here is sure to be, its course is deflected. The sun, then, though actually below the horizon today, was raised by this apparent uplift, and we were able to see one half of its face. We've been fishing through the sounding hole today with hooks, but our efforts proved disappointing. The hooks, when we raised the complicated sea apparatus, were missing. Either some submarine monster have taken the hooks, or they have dragged on a rocky bottom. The temperature at 9 a.m. was minus 12 degrees Celsius, and the weather shows signs of clearing, though the wind is veering northerly. Okay, cool. All is good. Thank you very much, Kaz. It is remarkable how a little incident, especially one surrounded by some mystery, when brought suddenly into our horizon, will arouse great excitement. This does not often happen, which accounts for the air of lethargy and disinterestedness which is coming over us with the increase of darkness, the weird outline of the dying face of the setting sun a few days ago, and the premonitions of the 70 sunless days through which we are now to pass aroused a new sensation. The extraordinary effects of the moon, vague lights and shadows on the horizon, indicating the possible outline of a new land, an occasional peak, or a new iceberg coming into our plane of vision. The uncommon changes of the auroras, of the weather, and the visit of the penguin or seal, all incite a new life. But the inspiration is of short duration. In a few hours the soul sinks again into its sleep, which is induced by the long night of months. This morning, however, there was an incident which startled everybody in a manner quite unusual. At about 7 o'clock the captain went out to find 2 stars from which to obtain an observation for position. The sky was too hazy to give him an observation, but his eye rested upon an inexplicable speck of light in the west. He stood and looked at it for some moments, did not change in position, but sparkled now and then like a star. The thing came suddenly, disappeared, and again reappeared in exactly the same spot. It was so curious and assumed so much the nature of a surprise that LeConte came into the cabin and announced the news. We accused him of having had too early an eye-opener, but we went out quickly to see the mystery. It was about 8 o'clock. The sky was streaky, mouse-coloured. The ice was grey, with a slight suggestion of lilac in the high lights, but the entire outline of the pack was vague under a very dark twilight. We looked for some time in the direction in which LeConte pointed, but we saw only a gloomy waste of ice, lined in places by breaks in the pack, from which oozed a black cloud of vapour. We were not sure that the captain's eyesight was not defective, and began to blackguard him afresh. After we had stood on the snow-decked bridge for 10 minutes, shivering and kicking about to keep our blood from freezing, we saw on a floe some distance westward a light like that of a torch. It flickered, rose and fell, as if carried by some moving object. We went forward to find if anybody was missing, for we could only explain the thing by imagining a man carrying a lantern. Everybody was found to be on board, and then the excitement ran high. Soon all hands were on deck, and all seemed to think that the light was being moved towards us. Is it a human being? Is it perhaps someone from an unknown South Polar race of people? For some minutes, no one ventured out on the pack. To meet the strange messenger. We were indeed not sufficiently dressed for this mission. Few had had breakfast. All were without mittens and hat. Some without coats and others without trousers. If it were a diplomatic visitor, we were certainly in an uncomfortable and undignified uniform with which to receive him. Amundsen, who was the biggest, the strongest, the bravest, and generally the best dressed man for sudden emergencies, slipped into his anorak, jumped on his ski, and skated rapidly over the gloomy blackness of the pack to the light. He lingered about the spot a bit, and then returned without company and without the light, looking somewhat sheepish. It proved to be a mass of phosphorescent snow, which had been newly charged by sea algae and was occasionally raised and brushed by the pressure ice. May 18. During the few hours of midday dawn, anyway, here I'll pause for a second. Everybody all right? Okay, so phosphorescent algae is like, I don't know what they call this. Anyway, it glows in the dark. And that's what they were seeing, rising and falling as the ice. There's still kind of a wave going on in the sea. So that's what they were seeing, it rising up and falling down again. May 18th, during the few hours of midday, we had made an excursion to a favourite iceberg to view the last signs of the departing day. It was a weird jaunt. I shall always remember the peculiar impression it produced upon me. When we started, almost all the party were outside, standing about in groups of 3 or 4, discussing the prospects of the long winter nights and the short glory of the scene about. A thing sadder by far than the fleeing sun was the illness of our companion, Lieutenant Danko. Danko was going to be the only person who died on board this ship, and they mentioned his sickness earlier, his heart failing. They could detect that his heart was weak. A thing sadder by far than the fleeing sun was the illness of our companion, Lieutenant Danko, which was emphasized to us now by his absence from all the groups, his malady confining him to the ship. We knew at this time that he would never again see a sunrise, and we felt that perhaps others might follow him. Who will be here to greet the returning sun, was often asked. My companions on the excursion were Gerlache and amundsen. Slowly and lazily we skated over the rough surface of the snow to the northward. We had not gone far before we discovered that the ice was cracking and large leads were cutting off our retreat. We mounted hummocks of unusual height and there awaited the imitation of the rising of the sun. Where the ice broke, it separated, leaving a lane of black sea from which oozed a peculiar vapour, in reality a cloud of small ice crystals which fell on the neighbouring ice fields. The countless miniature mountains or hummocks which covered the white fields had their northern faces brightened by a yellow light and their southern shadowed by a dull blue. This gave a little light to the unusual lifeless grey of the ice fields. Along the fresh leads there were a few penguins and an occasional seal, and in the water whales were spouting jets of breath. The pack, with the strange play of deflected light upon it, the subdued highlights, the softened shadows, the little speck of human and wildlife, and our good ship buried under its snows, should have been interesting to us, but we were interested only in the sky and in the northern portion of it. A few moments before 12, the cream-coloured zone in the north brightened to an orange hue, and precisely at noon, half of the form of the sun ascended above the ice. It was a misshapen, dull semicircle of gold, heatless, rayless, and sad. It sank again in a few moments, leaving almost no colour and nothing cheerful to remember through the 70 long days of darkness which followed. We returned to the ship and during the afternoon laid out the plans for our midwinter occupation. May 20th. It is the 5th day of the long night, and it certainly seems long, very long, since we have felt the heat of the sun. During the parting days of light the weather was exceedingly unsteady, and the sky, then constantly veiled by a frozen smoky vapour, but now a disturbing element seems to have been withdrawn. The horizon is not yet clear, but the zenith is almost always high and blue, with the Southern Cross generally visible until 9 o'clock in the morning and after 3 o'clock in the afternoon. From 11 to 1 o'clock at noon today there was light enough thrown over the northern ice to read ordinary print outside, but in our rooms it is necessary to burn lights continually. The little midday twilight is used to make soundings and to secure the fauna and flora of the shallow sea under us. Those not engaged in this work are busied in still more. That's a picture of an old lead, a new crevasse. Okay. Oh, you'll love it, Kitten Killer. It is available on, I think, Wikipedia or something like that. Not Wikipedia, I'm not sure. It's a good book, though. It's good to. I tend to print these things out and take 89 pages to bed and just read them. And that's how it would have been with this, you know. Madhouse at the End of the World. Now, Madhouse at the End of the World is the new book that was written about this. And I'm not sure if it's so much a diary, but Madhouse at the End of the World was written, I think, in the last decade about this story. This is the diary of Cook, who was the guy on board at the time. But yeah, I think Madhouse at the End of the World is the newer version of this book. Anyway, I've selected this part of the day to take daily walk over the pack to neighbouring floes and to distant icebergs, to study the ice and the life, and to obtain sufficient physical exercise as well as mental recreation to retard the spell of indifference which is falling over me. For 15 minutes before and after 12 o'clock, the sky and the ice are flooded by a wealth of fascinating colours. The northern sky is such that one momentarily expects the sun to rise. Here are the warm shades of red and yellow on the snow. Looking in this direction, there is a noticeable flesh colour in which one sees fetching lines of lilac. In the opposite direction, there are some weird shades of blue-black and a few dead sheets of grey-blue in shadowed surfaces, in the caverns of bergs and in the fissures, but the mixed shades of green and purple and violet are also displayed with crystal purity. I cannot describe this short spell of midday glory as it impresses me. If I could wield a brush and lay these colours on canvas, I feel that one of the ambitions of my life would be accomplished. And he did do this. He did make a painting of this, and it's on this slideshow that's on the bottom right. But I cannot, and what am I to do in black with an overworked pen, frosty ink, and a mind which is wearied as soon as the cheer of noonday passes? To the 1st of May, our health had been fairly good. We have had little complaints and some insignificant injuries, bruises, cuts, strains, frostbites. But there has been little of which to make a medical note. Since entering the pack, our spirits have not improved. The quantity of food which we have consumed individually and collectively has steadily decreased, and our relish for food has also slowly but steadily failed. I think just about 100 pages before this, they talk about tasting penguin for the first time. And realistically, if you look at the book Madhouse at the End of the Earth, there was almost a, what's the word for it? There was nearly an uproar on the ship, you know, about having to eat penguin. Most people didn't want to eat penguin. Anybody who tasted it twice didn't want to eat penguin. And they explained penguin to taste like fish, duck, and I'm not sure what else, but it was like a very original flavour to eat penguin. There was a time when each man enjoyed some special dish, and by distributing these favoured dishes at times, it was possible to have someone gastronomically happy every day. But now we are tired of everything. We despise all articles which come out of a tin, and a general dislike is the normal air of the Belgica. The cook is entitled, through his efforts to please us, to kind consideration, but the arrangement of the menu is condemned, and the entire food store is used as a subject for bitter sarcasm. Everybody having any connection with the selection or preparation of the food, past or present, is heaped with some criticism. Some of this is merited, but most of the natural outcome of a despairing isolation from accustomed comforts. I do not mean to say that we are more discontented than other men in similar conditions. This part of the life of polar explorers is usually suppressed in the narratives. An almost monotonous discontent occurs in every expedition through the polar night. It is natural that this should be so. For when men are compelled to see one another's faces, encounter the few good and many bad traits of character for weeks, months and years, without any outer influence to direct the mind, they are apt to remember only the rough edges which rub up against their own bumps of misconduct. If we could only get away from each other for a few hours at a time, we might learn to see a new side and take a fresh interest in our comrades. But this is not possible. The truth is that we are at this moment tired of each other's company, as we are of the cold monotony of the black night and of the unpalatable sameness of our food. Now and then we experience affectionate moody spells, and then we try to inspire each other with a sort of superficial effervescence of good cheer. But much moods are short-lived. Physically, mentally, and perhaps morally then, we are depressed. And from my past experience in the Arctic, I know that this depression will increase with the advance of the night and far into the increasing dawn of the next summer. The mental conditions have been indicated above. Physically, we are steadily losing strength, though our weight remains nearly the same, with a slight increase in some. Okay, yeah. Thank you for hanging around here, by the way. We are pale, and the skin all seem puffy about the eyes and the ankles, and the muscles, which were hard earlier, are now soft, though not reduced in size. We are pale, and the skin is unusually oily. The hair grows rapidly, and the skin about the nails has a tendency to creep over them, seemingly to protect them from the cold. The heart action is failing in force and is decidedly irregular. Indeed, this organ responds to the slightest stimulation in an alarming manner. If we walk hurriedly around the ship, the pulse rises to 110 beats, and if we continue for 15 minutes, it intermits, and there is also some difficulty of respiration. The observers going only 100 yards to the observatories come in almost breathless after their short run. The usual pulse too is extremely changeable from day to day. Now it is full, regular and vigorous. Again it is soft, intermittent and feeble. In one case it was yesterday 43, today it is 98, but the man complains of nothing and does his regular work. The sun seems to supply an indescribable something which controls and steadies the heart. In its absence it goes like an engine without a governor. There is at present no one disabled, but there are many little complaints. About half of the men complain of headaches and insomnia, many are dizzy and uncomfortable about the head, and others are sleepy at all times, though they sleep 9 hours. All of the secretions are reduced, from which it follows that digestion is difficult. Acid, dyspepsia, and frequent gastric discomforts are often mentioned. There are also rheumatic and neuralgic pains, muscular twitchings, and an indefinite number of small complaints, but there is but one serious case on hand. This is Danko. He has an old heart lesion, a leak of one of his valves, which has been followed by an enlargement of the heart and a thickening of its walls. In ordinary conditions, when there was no need for an unusual physical or mental strain, and when liberal fresh food and bright sunshine were at hand, he felt no defect. But these conditions are now changed. The hypertrophied muscle tissue is beginning to weaken, and atrophy of the heart is the result, dilating and weakening with a sort of measured step, which if it continues at the present rate will prove fatal within a month. May 22nd. It is clear and still. The temperatures fall into minus 19 degrees Celsius, and although sunless, this sharp cold weather at present is more agreeable to us than the dull stormy days with warmth and light a month ago. It is Sunday and we have nearly all been out for a jaunt on skis. We took some photographs, but they are ugly because there is nothing distinct in the pictures. It is not possible to make good clear pictures except on bright moonlight nights or on sharp sunny days. It is a custom aft to go into the masthead and scan the horizon for signs of life before starting on our tours of recreation. In this way we are reasonably sure to return with a penguin, a seal, or the story of an adventure. Today we saw a seal. Everything's still going. Scurvy next, yeah. Today we saw a seal about a mile from the ship, but when we got to it, the animal started towards the Belgica. We urged it on and drove it easily to our home. The creature looked about with much curiosity, when it came to the rough, dirty snow about the bark, and searched diligently for a hole through which it might plunge to the sea below. But no such hole or crevasse was within a mile of us, for the calm cold of the past week has reunited all the broken fragments into large fields. We threw a rope around the seal, which was a crab eater, intending to take its temperature and make other physiological experiments, but the thing was too slippery and too lively for us. Several instruments were broken, and some very strong ropes were snapped like ordinary twine. Finally, the seal was shot, and its skeleton was prepared to enrich a Belgian Museum of Natural History. There was tonight a bright aurora. It began a straight horizontal zone low on the southern sky. Later it changed to an arc with the parts of the two other arcs below it. A similar phenomena appeared last night, May 27th. The little dusk at midday is fading more. More and more. A feeble, deflected light falls upon the elevations, the icebergs and the hummocks, offering a faint cheerfulness. But this soon withdraws and leaves a film of blackness. The pack presents daily the same despondent surface of grey, which by contrast to the white sparkle of some time ago, makes our outlook even more melancholy. The weather is now quite clear and in general more settled. The temperature ranges from 5 to 10 degrees Celsius below zero. We have frequent falls of snow, but the quantity is small and the period is short. Generally, we are able to see the stars from 2 in the afternoon until 10 in the morning. During the 4 hours of midday, the sky is generally screened by a thick, icy vapor. There are few white petrels about. And in the sounding hole, we have noticed the seal occasionally, but there is now no other life. All have an abundance of work, but our ambition is for regular occupation, particularly anything which requires prolonged mental concentration, is wanting. Even the task of keeping up the log is too much. There's nothing new to write about, nothing to excite fresh interest. There are now no auroras and no halos. Everything on the frozen sea, and over its sleeping, the long sleep of the frigid night. Chapter 22. The South Polar night continued, days of discontentment. The greyness of the first days of night has given way to a soul-despairing darkness, broken only by the noon by a feeble yellow haze on the northern sky. I can think of nothing more disheartening, more destructive to human energy than this dense, unbroken blackness of the long polar night. In the Arctic, it has some redeeming features. There, the white invader has the Eskimo to assist, teach, and amuse him. The weather there is clear and cold, and in the regions around Greenland, where I've been engaged, there is land, real solid land, not the mere mockery of it, like the shifting pack that is about us here. With land at hand, prolonged journeys are always possible. But what are we to do on a moving sea of ice? May 29th. Yesterday we had a warm northerly gale, with much snow and a thick fog. The ice is again in rapid motion. There are many new leads, numerous pressure angles, and fresh fissures in the ice. Danko is steadily failing. Today is Sunday. The men look forward with some anticipation to this day, because Sunday is set aside not as a day of worship, for I have never seen a man on the Belgica with a Bible or prayer book in his hand, but as a time of freedom from usual duties. It is the weekly period of recreation and special feeding. The few eatables which are still relished are placed on the menu for Sunday. This serves to mark time and to divide somewhat the almost unceasing sameness of our life. This morning had in it no element of promise or cheer. Even at noon it was dark and gloomy, but the wet, warm, northerly wind of yesterday is blowing its last breath. The cold air of the upper atmospheric stratus is settling down over us again, as it always does in an approaching calm. In this region, nothing is more conducive to comfort than a sharp atmosphere with a low temperature. Warm weather is nice enough in summer or in more temperate latitudes, but in this sea of ice and in midwinter it is far from desirable. Outside from the personal discomforts, high temperature is our position in our position adds enormous dangers to our safety. The ice, now being firmly congealed, is crushed and thrown from one part of the ever restless sea to another. It is broken, crushed, and ground into a snowy powder, which only too well indicates to us what would become of our vessel if we were torn from its present bed. Last night a tremendous force was expended against the end of our floe, which made the sleeping Belgica quiver from stem to stern, but fortunately the good old ice block held together, while the smaller ice pans around her were pushed on the surface with a groan like that of a man in dire pain. Today all is quiet, no pressure groans, no noise of animals, no wind, even the usual noise on board has ceased. Since 3 o'clock the temperature has fallen 3 degrees every hour. Now at 8 o'clock it is minus 25.2 degrees Celsius. This is our favourite temperature, and what joy it brings. The day is perhaps, as a Sunday ought to be, cold, solemn and silent. A feeble arc aurora appeared at about 9 o'clock tonight. It was in the usual position, but the exhibit was so faint that had we not been trained by our previous observations, the phenomena would have passed unrecognized. May 31st. By a careful observation, Captain LeConte deduces our latitude to 71 degrees 36 minutes, latitude 87, 33, 30. For about a week we have drifted very little. The longitude has changed slightly, but since the 18th we have gone southward about 19 miles. To the present, this is our farthest point southward. On the 20th of March we were 71 degrees 35, longitude 88 degrees 02, a position very near that at present. The latitude of this day, 71 degrees 36, proved to be our farthest south during the entire drift with the pack. Okay, how are we getting on, everybody? Is everyone still here? We've got 12 people. My goodness. Okay, let's keep on going. The morning is perfect as we regard weather. The thermometer is at 23 degrees Celsius. There is almost no wind, and every break in the pack is covered by a thick sheet of new ice. We expected cold, clear weather, but it was otherwise yesterday and last night. The wind howled, the ice was again torn into small pieces, and there was great amount of pressure evident in the lines of hummocks running easterly and westerly. Either we have come against some obstruction southward, or the northerly pressure is extraordinary. During the night we were anxious about the safety of the Belgica, for as the fury of the wind rushed over us, the ice was broken and the vessel was subjected to a great amount of pressure. The ice is heaped up around the Belgica in huge walls, from 5 to 20 feet in height. The floes are turning, giving the old ship hard jabs in her ribs. She takes the savage blows with an agonizing moan. Although the pressure has been such that we packed our kits and were prepared to try the hospitality of the pack, there has been no real injury which we can discover. We were extremely glad this morning to find that the broken ice had been reunited, and we soon learned that the raised walls about would prove an effective embankment in future battles with the storms. At noon there was a faint show of a dawn. The sky in the north was touched with light fiery clouds. The snow had upon it not the slightest suggestion of this red, but remained a dull grey, while the sky above was a smoky blue. One not familiar with the freaks of polar day would have thought that the sun would surely rise, or that it had just sunk under the snow. But we know only too well that we are doomed to see it make fainter and fainter displays at noon for 3 more weeks. Precisely at 12 o'clock a strange rectangular block of fire appeared in the southeast. Its size was that of a small tabular iceberg, but it had a dull crimson glow, which made the scene at once weird and fascinating. Its base rested on the horizon, and it seemed to rise, brighten, and move northerly. The sky here was purple, thinly veiled by a light smoky haze, caused by ice crystals in the lower stratus of the atmosphere. but there was not another speck of redness on this side of the heavens, except the orange bow, usually seen over the twilight zone. We watched this with considerable awe and amazement for 10 minutes before we could determine its meaning. It passed through several stages of forms. Finally it separated and we discovered that it was the moon. It was in fact a sort of mirage of the moon, but the strange rectangular distortion, the fiery aspect, and its huge size made a sight long to be remembered. During the past days of night we have made soundings of the sea and have taken samples of submarine and surface life. This has given Artwoski and Rakovica an abundance of work. It is interesting to see them plod along, working steadily and faithfully in the dark laboratory, packing away specimens, jotting down notes, stooping over the microscopes and other instruments, always with a pencil in one hand and a stick in the other, to greet the first man who dares interrupt them in their den. Poor fellows, their faces are tired and drawn, as if some great calamity had come upon them. Danko is keeping up with doggish persistence his magnetic observations, the details of which are such that he is almost constantly occupied during working hours. He is steadily failing, but he complains little and keeps up a kind of abnormal cheerfulness. The meteorological work is now the most troublesome task, for it requires someone to make the observations every hour, and sometimes oftener. Each of us had planned a work of some magnitude to be completed before sunrise. Commandant Gerlache started to rewrite the ship's log. LeConte began to complete the details of summer hydrographic work. Rakovica, in addition to regular laboratory work, was to plan the outlines of a new book on the geographical distribution of life. Artwoski had in mind a dozen scientific problems to elucidate. Amundsen entered into a co-partnership with me to make new and more perfect travelling equipment. And in addition to this, I had an anthropological work of the past summer to place into workable order, and a book on Antarctic exploration. Thus we had placed before us the outline for an industrious occupation, but we did little of it. As the darkness increased, our energy waned. We became indifferent and found it difficult to concentrate our minds or fix our efforts to any one plan of action. The work mapped out was partly accomplished, but it was done after the return of the sun. Page 300. Okay. Am I going to do press-ups? Okay, I'm going to continue on. I'm going to continue on for another 10 minutes here, at least. Have a drink. The regular routine of our work is tiresome in the extreme, not because it is difficult of execution or requires great physical exertion, but because of its monotony. Day after day, week after week, and month after month, we rise at the same hour, eat the same things, talk on the same subjects, make a pretense of doing the same work, and look out upon the same icy wilderness. We try hard to introduce new topics for thought and new concoctions for the weary stomach. We strain the truth to introduce stories of home and of flowery future prospects, hoping to infuse a new cheer, but it all fails miserably. We are under the spell of the black Antarctic night, and like the world which it darkens, we are cold, cheerless, and inactive. We have aged 10 years in 30 days. Here is an outline of a day's life on the Belgica. Rise at 7:30 a.m., coffee at 8, 9 to 10 open-air exercise, 10 to 12 scientific work such as regular meteorological, magnetic or laboratory tasks for the officers, and for the Marines bringing in the snow, melting snow for water, replenishing the ship's stores, repairing the ship, building new quarters, making new instruments, and doing anything which pertains to the regular work of the expedition. 12 to 2 p.m. dinner and rest or recreation. 2 to 4 official work. Regular work during this period was suspended for the greater part of the night. 6 to 7 supper, 7 to 10 card playing, music, mending, and on moonlight nights, excursions. At 10 o'clock we went to sleep. Up to this time our health had been fairly good, excepting a few light attacks of rheumatism, neuralgia, and some unimportant traumatic injuries. There had been no complaint. We ate little, however, and were thoroughly disgusted with canned foods. We had tried the meat of the penguins, but to the majority its flavour was still too fishy. We entered the long night somewhat underfed. Not because there was a scarcity of food, but because of our unconquerable dislike for such as we had. It's interesting the way they talk about food on these missions. An awful lot of missions. Same with Everest. By the time they got to the end of each one of the missions to Everest, they were trying to plan different food for the next mission. And on each of the missions, it didn't matter what food they brought; they still got sick and tired of it after a while. So it's interesting, the way they talk about the dislike, unconquerable dislike for the food. It is possible to support life for 7 or 8 months upon a diet of canned food, but after this period, there's something in the human system which makes it refuse to utilize the elements of nutrition contained in the tins. Against such foods, even a short period, the stomach protests. Confined to it for a long period, it simply refuses to exercise its functions. Articles which in the canning, retaining a natural appearance, usually remain, especially if cooked a little, friendly to the palate. So articles which in the canning retain a natural appearance usually remain, especially if cooked a little, friendly to the palate. This is particularly true of meat retaining hard fibres such as ham, bacon, dried meats and corned beef. It is also true of fruits preserved in juices and vegetables such as peas, corns, tomatoes, and of dried things. Unfortunately, this class of food formed a small part of our store. We were weighed down with the supposed finer delicacies of the Belgian, French and Norwegian markets. We had laboratory mixtures in neat cans combined in such a manner as to make them look tempting. Hashes under various catchy names, sausage stuffs in deceptive forms, meat and fish balls said to contain cream, mysterious soups, and all the latest inventions in condensed foods. But they one and all proved failures as a steady diet. The stomach demands things with a natural fibre or some tough, gritty substance. At this time, as a relief, we would have taken kindly to something containing pebbles or sand. How we longed to use our teeth. The long darkness, the isolation, the tinned foods, the continued low temperature, with increasing storms and a high humidity, finally reduced our systems to what we call polar anemia. We became pale with a kind of greenish hue. Our secretions were more or less suppressed. The stomach and all the organs were sluggish and refused to work. Most dangerous of all, the cardiac and cerebral systems. The heart acted as if it had lost its regulating influence. Its action was feeble, but its beats were not increased until other dangerous symptoms appeared. Now, I just want to cut forward a little bit because it's something that, it's this eerie feeling of this ship. Right now, they're looking at the nails on their beds, covered in ice, balls of ice. Every time they breathe it out, the ice would gather on anything that was metal or steel around them. And so their beds contained balls of ice anywhere there was a nail. So I'm not sure if it comes later on in this story, but I just wanted to give you that image of this cold, horrible dampness that they're now living in. Anyway, going back to the heart, its action was weak, irregular, and entirely unreliable throughout the night. The mental symptoms were not so noticeable. The men were incapable of concentration and unable to continue prolonged thought. One sailor was forced to the verge of insanity, but he recovered with the returning sun. The first to feel the effects of polar anemia seriously was our lamented friend and companion, Lieutenant Danko. With the descent of the sun began the beginning of his end. On the short journeys which we took during the few moments of noonday twilight, Danko complained of shortness of breath. Indeed, all had some difficulty of respiration upon the slightest exercise, but Danko would frequently stand still and gasp. For this he came under medical care early in May, but in spite of every effort he rapidly sank. June 1st. It is now difficult to get out of our warm beds in the morning. There is no dawn, nothing to mark the usual division of night and morning until nearly noon. During the early part of the night it is next to impossible to go to sleep, and if we drink coffee we do not sleep at all. When we do sink into a slumber, it is so deep that we are not easily awakened. Our appetites are growing smaller and smaller, and the little food which is consumed gives much trouble. Can I just do a audio check? Is everything staying okay with no crackles? So I don't know if there's anybody there that can answer that question for me. All good, or yes, there's crackles. Okay, thank you very much. Oh, for that heavenly ball of fire, not for the heat, the human economy can regulate that, but for the light, the hope of life. June 2nd, the night was very cold, with a wind veering from southwest to west, coming in puffs, with a coldness that made the ice and rigging of the Belgica groan. At about 6 o'clock last night, while a stiff wind was blowing, the ice fractured around the Belgica and allowed her to sink gradually into the water out of which she has been raised. The squeaking of the ship, the groaning of the ice, the howling of the wind were for a short time maddening. After a time we became accustomed to this and sank our anxiety and some fear, though we hesitated to own it, in a lively game of whist. This proved to be the coldest night thus far, minus 29 degrees Celsius or minus 20.2 Fahrenheit. I had resolved to rise at 7 o'clock, but owing to the lethargy due to the long darkness and the profound sleep, I did not find myself out of my berth until 11. When I rise at this time, I omit the formality of the breakfast, and this my stomach does not complain. 4 months ago, during the Antarctic summer, to omit breakfast would have been to reject one of the delights of polar life, but now in this melancholy darkness is like being relieved of a weighty duty. June 3rd. The men forward are kept busy with the usual work of the ship, cleaning, restowing, repairing sails, ropes and woodwork, etc. One man is constantly occupied in keeping the fires going. Another man keeps up the supply of snow, which is melted for water. The work of sounding, taking deep sea temperatures and fishing keeps many busy. For much of the time it is also necessary to employ several men to keep the vessel well banked with snow, and the observatories need a similar attention. Thus the sailors are evenly occupied in easy work, which keeps them from feeling the melancholy of our isolation from the world, and also helps them to forget the prolonged darkness of this dayless night. Our flow has again grown to encouraging dimensions. From the mere fragment which remained after the last severe disturbance, it has gradually taken unto itself pan after pan, until now we can no longer see its end. On the sky we observe mouse-coloured bands at noon, which tell us that there are few fissures where a heavy mist rises from the open water. This is the usual water sky in miniature. From the shape of these dark streaks we know the size of the outline of the water under it. The bergs change position a little, new ones occasionally crowd over our horizon and remain visible a short time, then return to their old positions. Old ones turn about somewhat, thus presenting a new face to us. Some are raised by a mirage, and all are buried under the gloomy veil of blackness, which is so rapidly spreading over the once white splendour. We've had much snow within a fortnight, which by the aid of the varying winds has drifted over the icy hummocks and ridges raised by pressure, and made for us a substitute for Mother Earth once more. On ski and snowshoes we can again travel about for miles on a newly assembled old floe, but the position marking of the old leads and lakes is still difficult for pleasurable journeys. These places resemble in their contour a bird's eye view of a large city. To cross them as if we tried to cross a city over the roofs of houses. Still, it is possible to travel in this wilderness of ice if one is fortunate enough to have polar patience and a body which can be tossed about like a football. Our floe, with all its roughness, with all its faults, is nevertheless a providential protection to the good little Belgica and a godsend to its occupants. We are all eating appreciably less now than during the bright season, and either there is a constant inclination to sleep or persistent insomnia. We eat an amount of fat, however, that would surprise most people. Fat pork, fatty meats, the pure oil of bacon, and tremendous quantities of margarine are consumed with apparent relish. This to me particularly surprising because during 3 Arctic voyages I never noticed any particular craving for fat, but this I ascribe to the fact that we always ate liberally of fresh meats north, and these we have not here. We eat a little penguin with a show of pleasure, but most of us are quite tired of its marine flavour and fish oil smoothness. If we had sufficient ham, it would afford immense gastric delight. There is much indigestion now, fermentation, gastric inertia, intestinal and gastric pain, imperfect heptic action, and a general suppression of all the digestive secretions. The heart is unsteady, easily disturbed, and mitral murmurs, which I have not heard before, are audible. Temperatures, almost without exception, are all subnormal. The breathing is often difficult. The blood retreats from the skin, but the larger veins are abnormally full. Piles, hemorrhoids, headache, neuralgia, rheumatism are the systemic complaints. But while we all have our little disorders, no one is really disabled. Yet. Right. Shall we leave it there for this evening? Who wants to go on? 22:35. We've 9 people still here. The weather is unendurable. The temperature is minus 30 degrees Celsius, and an easterly gale is bearing us in a huge drift of snow. And the temperature, such as we have had for the past 3 days, ranging from minus 28 to minus 30, is utterly impossible to exist outside of the open blast. In calm weather, such a temperature causes delight, but in a storm it gives rise to despair. I think it is Conan Doyle who says, "What companion is there like the great restless, throbbing polar sea? What human mood is there which it does not match and sympathize with?" I should like Mr. Doyle to spend 1 month with us on this great restless, throbbing sea under this dense, restless, throbbing blackness of the Antarctic night. I'm sure he would find conditions to drive his pen, but where is the companionship of the sea, which with every heave brings a block of ice against your berth, making your only hope of life, the bark, tremble from end to end? Where is the human being who will find sympathy in the howling winds under the polar night? For several days our beloved companion Danko has been failing. From nearly the very first day of his sickness, I saw that, coming upon him as it had done in the dusk, must prove fatal during the long Antarctic night. To pass through a polar night with its prolonged and awful cold and remain well is a very difficult matter, even for a man with sound organs. One who has not these, and perfect health, always fares badly in these sunless and lifeless polar days. Danko has had unconsciously for years a serious heart defect. For a time the heart walls increased in strength, and thus a safe equilibrium was established. But to keep an even or compensatory balance, mild exercise was necessary in the open air with an abundance of sunlight. The sun has been entirely absent for more than a fortnight, and for 40 days its light has been of no physiological service. The atmosphere has been so constantly filled with snow and ice crystals that at best the sun shone with less brilliance than the moon, and that only for a few moments at midday. During all of this time Danko has not felt well. His manly courage, however, is such that he will not complain, But as the darkness becomes blacker and the frigid night advances, he has been compelled to surrender himself a candidate to the sick list. June 4th, the ice is again breaking, and the pressure of the floes as they ride over each other makes a noise, converting the otherwise dark quietude into a howling scene of groans. It is again snowing, and the wind keeps veering from the northwest to northeast. Whenever we have advanced on our mysterious drift with the restless pack, either far east or far south or both, we are arrested in our progress, and the temperature falls. In the east there is also great pressure, and it is only in the far east or south that we get easterly or southerly winds. These winds have the character of land breezes, extremely dry with a low temperature, followed by delightful clear weather. From these facts we must conclude that the east and south are lined with land of large proportions or islands united by ice. An easy wind south or west drives us quickly. Indeed, at times we drift northward without wind. The bergs now seem to press north and east. June 5th. Today we have to record the darkest page in our log, the death of our beloved comrade Danko. It has not been unexpected, for we have known he could not recover. But the awful blank left by his demise is keenly felt, and the sudden gloom of despair thus thrown over the entire party is impossible of description. Poor fellow. In the past 48 hours he had been steadily improving, and although we were not encouraged by this, he felt so much better that he was cheerful and altogether more like his former self. But it was the calm before the storm. Without any premonition of his coming death, Danko passed away easily tonight. His last words to me were, "I can breathe lighter and will soon get strength." A companion with noble traits has left us. The event is too sad to note in detail. His life has steadily and persistently sunk with the northerly setting of the sun. In ordinary health his circulation was so nicely balanced that it needed but the unbalancing element of the prolonged darkness to disturb the equilibrium and send him to a premature grave. We've made a bag, June 7th, we've made a bag of sailcloth and into the remains of Danko have been sewn. This morning we searched the crevasses for an opening which might serve as a grave. We found no place sufficiently open, but with axes and chisels we cut an aperture through the young ice in a recent lead, about 100 yards from the bark. Owing to the depressing effects upon the party, we found it necessary to place the body outside on the ice upon a sledge the day after the death. At a few minutes before noon today, the commandant, followed by the officers and scientific staff, came to this sledge. The crew, dressed in an outer suit of duck, then marched out, and taking the drag rope, they proceeded over the rough drifts southerly to the lead. The day was bitterly cold, with a wind coming out of the southwest. Much snow and fine crystals was driven through the air, and it pierced the skin like needles. The surface of the ice was grey, but the sky had here and there a touch of brightness. In the north there was a feeble metallic glow, and directly overhead there were a few stratus of rose-coloured clouds. The moon, fiery with a ragged edge, hung low on the southern sky. There was light enough to read ordinary print, but it was a weird light. Danko was a favourite among the sailors, and his departure was as keenly felt in the forecastle as among us. The men expressed this in the funeral procession. Slowly but steadily they marched over the rough surface of the ice with an air of inexpressible sadness. The sledge was brought to the freezing water. Here the commandant made a few fitting remarks, and then 2 heavy weights were attached to the feet, and the body was entrusted to the frosted bosom of the Antarctic Ocean. Right, so that brings us to the conclusion for this evening. So I really appreciate everybody's hung around for this. Hello Scoot Lady Chicago, hello Kitten Killer, hello Elusive Dartmoor, hello Mick from Hampshire Outdoors, hello Haley, hello Bushy Baz Outdoors, Thanks for everybody for coming this evening. I will read more of this, and we will proceed. You know, you can always come, you don't have to be here for the live, you can always come and listen to it. I will be making a playlist, so I will be hiding the lives and unlisting them, but I have created a playlist called Lives, and I will also put this into a playlist called South, the Antarctic, because I don't want to flood things on the channel. There's everybody there. So yeah, if it's not here, or if you're looking for it, or you think you've missed it, just send me a message and I'll send you a link to it. It could be in any folder that there's 2 playlists I've made. One is called Lives, so if it's recorded here, it's in Lives. If I record it without doing a live, it will be in South Antarctic. It's another playlist that I have with all the Antarctic stuff for the playlists. Alright, so I appreciate everybody being here this evening. Thank you very much for being here, and I hope you enjoyed up until June 8th, and we'll proceed with this again. It might be tomorrow night or the next night. Okay. Thanks everybody. Thank you very much, Sticks, as well. Appreciate it. Okay. Did I miss anything? Does anybody have any feedback for me? Could you all hear that okay? Is the volume okay? And everything like that? There's a crackle now. How long has there been a crackle? Really?